Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Mike Phillips, and I am the host. This is the Leadership Toolkit, where I get together with some really awesome folks and have some very organic conversations, some collaborative conversations on what leadership is, what they've learned through their failures, their successes, and so they can bring information to you with an opportunity to grow yourself and the people that you're coaching, whether it be your staff or your followers and everybody that's in your circle. So I am very excited. I have a great guest today. His name is Ben Cosh. I'm going to bring him on right about now. Ben, welcome to the show. Thanks for being a guest today, man.
Hi, Mike. It's good to be here. Really, really pleased and excited to be here and looking forward to talking about this stuff with you. I just like talking about this stuff. So it's great to get to do it with someone like you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so appreciative that you would take your time to come on the show. So Ben's background, he is at the University of Kent. You're a professor there. I won't try and muddle through everything. I'm going to give you the microphone for a minute. So if you would take a moment and just sort of explain to everybody here who you are, what you do, a little bit of your background, and I'd love to hear some more.
Sure. So yeah, I'm at the University of Kent in the UK, and I'm a mathematician by background, and I'm a professor at the university, and I'm also well, my job title is director of division. My kids love it that I'm a mathematician and my job title is director of division. They wonder if we've got directors of subtraction, addition, and multiplication as well. We haven't, of course. But basically, I'm the dean of computing engineering and mathematical sciences at the University of Kent. And I've been doing kind of leadership roles in universities in the UK for the last 15 years or so as department head or dean or associate dean. And I've been doing those roles for about 15 years. And I just like talking about and thinking about this stuff. So I'm not a professor of leadership. I know a couple of those, and they would be annoyed if I was presenting myself as an academic professor of leadership. But I'm just I'm an interested observer, and I enjoy thinking about this stuff as an amateur and a practitioner. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. And I think you and I connected, gosh, I don't know. I want to say a couple, 3 years ago through sort of a leadership roundtable kind of mentoring group that we belong to through building some leadership content on YouTube. And so I quickly became a fan because while you're saying, oh, hey, they would be upset. I think one of the unique things about leadership is for everyone. It's an opportunity for us all to learn. It's an opportunity to learn to lead ourselves, certainly other people and so forth. And definitely you've shared some unique perspectives. And just from where you come from, you and I had exchanged an email or two getting ready for this, and I really appreciated the comments. You said you love the fact that it's called the Leadership Toolkit because leaders need tools, and then one of the things that you pointed out here was sort of your definition of leadership, and I'd like you to share that with everybody and maybe expand on it a little bit. How do you define leadership, Ben?
Well, so my definition of leadership, having thought about this for ages, and lots of this stuff comes from job interviews, actually, being in job interviews and being asked these questions. And the first time it happened, I got a question I didn't know how to answer. I was asked about how you influence people, and I wanted to say, well, I just do because I did it every day.
Right.
But that wasn't a good enough answer, and I bluffed my way through something, and it was an awful answer to the question, how do you influence people? And I didn't get the job, and I came out of that going, I've got to come up with good answers to these questions for my job interviews. And some of what I've done on YouTube is dishing out those interview answers, really. So that's where what's your definition of leadership comes from. And my answer is, it's understanding what's going on, figuring out what needs to happen, and working with people to make it happen. And I like that definition because it works. It's like you were saying, leadership is for everybody. That definition works wherever you are in the hierarchy. It doesn't require a title or a job description or a role. It doesn't even require a team. It doesn't matter if you've got 50,000 people, 5 people, or no people. If you understand what's going on, figure out what needs to happen, and can work with people to make it happen, you are leading. Doesn't matter whether that's your job title, you're doing it. And I also like it because it works whatever sort of leadership we're talking about, whether it's in an organization and you've got a team of people, or political leadership, or you're in your church or your sports team. And it works whether you're talking about kind of strategic scale, what's going on in your sector over the last 6 months and what's going to be happening for the next 2 years, and how are you positioning yourself for that.
Sure.
And it works in the immediate scale, in a conversation. What's going on in this conversation? We're going round and round and round in circles. What needs to happen? Somebody needs to make a decision. What can I do to help get us there? How can we work with people? I'm going to say out loud, somebody needs to make a decision here, folks. I've got another meeting to go to in 20 minutes. Can we please make a decision? So I like it. I like it for that sort of little collection of reasons. It fits in lots of different ways.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I really took away when you sent this to me, I think one of the most powerful things that people in a leadership role can do is ask good questions.
Yeah.
And I thought that was such a good question when you sent it and you said, hey, look, here's sort of my definition of leadership. And we're talking about this. What understanding what's going on, like what's going on. And there's a lot that can be left to interpretation. But at the same time, like you're sharing, it's easy to say, well, okay, once I have an understanding, once I have a grasp of even what my perception is, the other unique piece in asking that question of what's going on is it allows you to understand what other people's perception is.
Yeah.
What are they thinking? Where are they thinking that you're at?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and also it gives you a route into not just what's going on in the business, but what's going on with the people around you. So what's going on is Dave is really distressed by something, and I don't know what, but Dave is clearly distressed. And what needs to happen right now is I need to figure out why Dave's distressed and help him get through that distress to something. So I think you're right. Asking good questions is the key of it. And that definition gives you a little set of questions, right? What's going on? What needs to happen? What can I do to help make it happen? It's giving you, that definition is kind of giving you a tool. It's giving you something to put in your leadership toolkit to help you actually do leadership. The thing that, leadership is a verb as well as a noun. It's something that you do. It's a collection of things that you do. And asking that little collection of questions often is a great start to actually doing the business of leading.
So when you say doing the business of leading, when you're saying it's a verb,
yeah,
what are some of the things that you have to, because I'm a huge fan of that. I think that's great also. When you say, hey, leadership is a verb, like you have to do something. You don't just get to stand up and go da 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 da. Like I got the right. Yeah. I got the temp or the award. Now I'm a leader. But what are some of the things, let's say for people that are watching this, when they first get into a leadership role, because you shared just a few minutes ago, you said, hey, I was interviewing for a role. They asked me what is leadership, and there was a void there. And so what are some of the first things? And I remember being, sorry, this is just how my brain works, but I remember moving into one of my first business, like executive leadership roles in business. And I remember the person asking me, sat me down and looked right at me and he says, hey, what are the first, if we were to put you in charge, what are the first 5 things that you would do? What are the first 5 actions you would take?
Yeah.
And I don't remember all 5 now. I remember a couple or 3, and I know I'm probably catching you a little flat-footed on this, but I'm going to ask you, if you have somebody moving into a leadership role and you're saying, hey, leadership is a verb, you have to do something. What are the first few things that you do as a leader when you're taking over a new team? Like 2, 3, 4, 5 things.
Yeah. So the first thing, and I could possibly drag this out to 3 things, right? So,
however you want to do it.
But the kind of first 3 things are have conversations with people. So, and the 3 people that you need to have conversations with, you need to have a conversation with your boss. You need to have a conversation with every single person in your team as an individual, whoever it is that you are leading, one-to-ones with those people. And you need to have a conversation with some of your clients or customers, whether those are people who are buying your stuff or other parts of the organization that your bit of the organization serves somehow. So the first three things are to have conversations with those groups of people to get a sense of what's going on in the business right now. What's the stuff that really needs to happen in the business right now? What's the stuff that needs to happen in our team? The sorts of things in your one-to-one with your team. What's working? What wouldn't you change? And what's really not working? What would you like to see change? If you could change one thing today, what would it be? I once, when I stepped into a leadership role, I asked everybody, what's the most important thing I should do for the success of our team? It was a department head job. So for our department, what's the most important thing I should do? And this chap said, he said, let me do my research. And I said, well, yeah, I'm interested in you doing your research. Absolutely. I said, but I meant kind of for the whole department. What's the most important thing I should do? He said, no. I knew what you meant. The most important thing you should do is let me do my work, which I think it turned out not to be true. I think he was wrong.
Why do you say that?
It was a really interesting answer, and I learned loads about him in that moment, in that answer. And so the first three things, I have those conversations. The fourth thing is to try to corral those into your own sense of what's going on and what needs to happen. If that's your task as a leader, is to figure out what needs to happen and work with people to make it happen. So you have to shape from those conversations, okay, from all of that, this is my sense of what's going on and what needs to happen. And the last thing I would say is narrow it down to one thing that you're going to try to make happen first and pursue that. I mean, we'll probably go on to talk about this in a bit, but prioritizing is one of the most important things you have to do as a leader. Another one is engaging, and the first three things I said to do was engage with everybody. Mm-hmm. Prioritizing is really important. So whatever the grand plans, whatever the management responsibilities you have, I'd love to talk about the difference between leadership and management, but whatever the management responsibilities you have, prioritize to one thing that needs to happen and commit to working on that as quickly as you can, because then straight away you're getting into the business of leading. You're making something happen and you've chosen what that thing is.
That's really good. That's a really good answer. And I'm gonna just because I learn as much from my guests as I hope to share with my audience, because as we go through, so I was taking notes as you were saying this. That's part of the reason you got we're on the whole screen, is I'm writing stuff down. So, but I think it's really good. So for someone watching this, if you're moving into a leadership role, whether it be middle management, if you are just a leader, and I would really take that to heart, because what Ben just shared is very powerful. He said, look, have conversations with your boss, one-on-one with your people, and then with the people that you serve, whether it be customers or others within the organization. Yeah. You said, corral a sense of what should happen. Now it goes back to your first, hey, what is leadership? Like, understand what's going on. You have to figure out what needs to happen.
And crucially in that bit, sorry to interrupt you, crucially in that bit is, what do you think? So you get a sense from everybody else of what they think. You have to come up with your own sense of what you think needs to happen, and that might be easy from whatever, if everybody says the same thing, it's easy. The tricky bit is when lots of people say different things, so you have to corral your own sense, because if you're going to lead, it has to come from inside you.
Absolutely. And then the last thing you said, hey, narrow it on one thing. So there's two or three directions we could go with this now, because you brought up, you said, hey, the difference between management and leadership, and I do want to touch on that, but not yet, because the thing that you said, that number 5, you said, hey, narrow it down to that one thing. Hey, what's the direction? What are we doing? Where are we headed? And we got to move everybody in unison. What if you start doing that one thing, Ben, and it doesn't work?
Ooh. Well, there's two different answers to that. So I think the most important thing is, when you're new in a team, the chance of that is actually relatively high. The first thing you could think is, okay, I think this is what we're going to do, and off you go and you run towards it. And then, like you say, hang on a minute, Oh, that isn't. Or someone in your team says, I didn't mean that.
Right.
I know I
That's
said
not what
this,
I meant.
I didn't mean do that. I meant do this. You go, what? Hang on. I mean, I've had that. Almost exact thing happen to me. It was a slightly longer time frame. But in stepping into a role and corralling my sense of, okay, this is how we need to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Walked people some way up the mountain, and then had a kind of brilliant, but in some sense to me at that moment devastating presentation from somebody external. Came in and said, we've got a really interesting sort of pile of data for you to think about and look at, and what you absolutely shouldn't do is this thing, which was exactly the thing that I tried to take the team towards. You absolutely shouldn't do that, you should do this. And he said that not knowing where I've been trying to say
Where
the
you
same.
Sure.
Okay. And the response to that has to be, and it requires some humility. You talked a lot about that last week with Sean, right? But it requires some humility. Weirdly, it requires confidence as well to say, you know what, fair enough. I'm sorry, I misunderstood, or I really thought that this was the right thing. But having now talked about it all with you again, I can see that actually trying to push this button is going to blow everything up. We'll back off from it and we'll pick something else. The nice thing about that happening early in your tenure is you can get away with the kind of, I'm the new guy, right? I'm new, fair enough. I've learned. Let's
Sure.
get on with the next thing.
Well, I think one of the, if I may here, I think one of the advantages to that is that definitely scores you some respect with your team. They see that
Yeah,
you're willing to be, you are willing to have some humility. They see that you're willing to change. That they probably see that you care more about the team and the idea of the result than you do about the plan. And
yeah,
I think oftentimes leaders fall into that trap where they care so much about the plan because it's like it's their plan, right? Well, that's my plan, and so I love the plan, and that's how we got to get there.
yeah,
And it's like, but does that serve everybody the best? Is that what gets us to the mountaintop uh, most efficiently and with all of our people intact?
yeah,
And so I agree with you. I think humility is a big one. I think the fact that we do have to care more about, well, where are we headed? Like what is our perceived outcome? What is our idea of a win? And what is that more so than how we're going to do it?
yeah.
So it shows a leader's willing to evolve also. Chris, who's over here watching, hey, good to see you, Chris. I've connected with him on a lot of levels. He says, no game plan, no growth.
Yeah,
And I think I mean, that was your total outline. When I say, hey, what's the first 3 to 5 things as a leader? Like that's one of the first things in your head. Even you take a step back before step 1, and it's like, well, what's your game plan as a leader to approach this? And I think that's what you outlined very nicely for everybody here is, hey, here's these three action steps, or 5 action steps, excuse me.
yeah. And that was an interview question I hadn't prepped for. I'm getting better at answering them on the fly. That's what one thing I've learned. I'm getting better at answering on the fly. But just to pick up on something you said about caring about the team as much as about the plan. I often use a phrase: you want to bring people with you, not drag them along. And there's a difference between those two things. And there's also, coming back on the leadership is a verb thing. So
Mhm.
I said earlier, I'm not a leadership academic. So there's a guy called John Adair who is a proper leadership academic, and he's got a thing called the action-centered leadership model, where he talks about the actions that leaders take have to fit into 3 characteristics. 1 is to get tasks done. 2 is to grow individuals. And 3 is to build the team. And so 2/3 of those things are about the people that you're working with, as much as they are about the plan for the business and how the tasks that you've got to get done. And
Sure.
so that leaning into, well, hang on a minute, actually, I need to let the plan go a bit here because I need to be building the team. And as a leader, you are part of the team as well. And what your
Sure.
place in that team is really important. And so if you're going to be the person who is constantly dragging the team where they don't want to go or where they don't think it's going to work, sometimes that's necessary, but it's not a great place to start.
Sure.
You need to build up some trust and respect in order to say, right, I now know you've got, I trust that I've got all of our best interests at heart. Now I'm going to tell you some hard truths and take you to a difficult place. Doing that right off the bat on day one is really, really hard. You've got to build up some trust. You've got to build the team before you can start doing that stuff.
Well, and I've heard it said when it comes to leadership, you have to make more deposits before you start making withdrawals. If we looked at our trust or our respect account as a bank account, right? And every time you are putting something into people, I mean, even as you said here, you said, okay, you have to get stuff done. You have to drive results. You have to grow people, and you got to build the team. 2 of the 3, right, are deposits. And so every time you're depositing to somebody, every time you're coaching someone one-on-one, every time you're listening to them and you're hoping for their growth and their success, and again, this was something I learned actually in sales was, okay, so when you're depositing into somebody, it's always 25 cents. Okay. So if I'm putting 25 cents in, but know that every time you're asking for something, every time you're going to give them that constructive criticism, every time you're going to say, hey, here's how we really should do it, a withdrawal is always 50 cents. So the key is, if you're going to deposit into people, you have to make twice as many or 3 times as many deposits to gain that trust and respect as withdrawals. Because what happens in life, in leadership, if I'm constantly withdrawing from my people, I'm constantly telling them what they've got to do. I'm constantly telling them how they're not doing it right. I'm constantly telling them something else. It's very easy to become overdrawn in your trust account, in your bank account. And before you know it, you may have the title, but they don't view you as a leader anymore.
Yeah.
They don't view you as their leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a trust, they just don't trust me. When talking with new leaders, often they don't trust me or they don't listen to me. Both of those things are things that you have to give before you get back.
Absolutely.
So if you feel like your team aren't trusting you, you need to be asking yourself, well, am I showing them that I trust them? And anytime anybody says, well, you've got to earn trust. No, you don't. You can give trust freely. I can trust Mike to run this show beautifully. And I can choose to do that and not worry about it. It's going to be great. I can choose to do that.
Sure.
Completely, it's a free choice to trust. It's a free choice to listen. People aren't listening to you. When was the last time you really listened to them? Is usually what I say. And it's like you said, you've got to pay those deposits in before you can start pulling some back. Definitely.
Well, I think one of the things is real caring. Listening from a leadership perspective shows real caring. And I think one thing that oftentimes people do is they listen to respond rather than listen to hear. And I'm guilty of it. We all do it, right? We listen, and like you were saying with the questions, anytime we go on a job interview, that's a perfect example. We go on a job interview, we're listening to give the best response. We're listening to give okay, well, what is it that they're looking for? What do they want to hear from me? Versus really listening to hear what they have to say and understand. If I listen to understand, it does take a moment more to respond then, but it allows us to process it through our own model of the world, through our own lens, and give a really quality response, give some really quality coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And it was a big lesson on the most powerful training course I've ever been on, was exactly that point of, especially if you've gotten a leadership position, you're probably pretty good at stuff, right? I mean, you've been promoted into that thing because you're good and you get it, and you've got lots of perspectives on what's going on in your organization. You've got lots of ideas.
Sure.
And whatever the conversation topic is, you've probably got something really good. You've got a really neat point to make. And it takes a great deal of effort to shut that down in yourself and actually pay attention to what the person in front of you is saying and why they're saying it and where they're coming from, and not be wanting to get your clever point out.
Well, and oftentimes when that happens, when we listen to understand, and oftentimes that gives people, because it does take a moment to respond when we're trying to process that for ourselves. Oftentimes you'll have somebody come in totally from the side, right? That's that left hook. Phew, here they come. And that's the person that never speaks up, but they have this brilliant idea. And if you'd been so busy spitting out the quote unquote answers, you would have never heard that brilliant idea. They would have never had the opportunity. And you lose that collaboration. You lose that opportunity for that person to win also. That's more of leading from the middle of an organization. Just to shift gears on you a little bit, because you said this a few minutes ago. You said, "Hey, we could get into this for hours." I think we probably could, but because everybody has a perspective on this. There's a lot of people and I think a lot of people in my circle share a similar perspective to what I have, and it's like, well, okay, so what is the difference in leadership and management? Because leadership, a lot of people say, well, it's the same thing. Like if I get into management, then I have a leadership role. Some people say, well, leadership is sort of this ethereal thing and so on and so forth. But let's talk about that for just a minute. What do you view as the difference between, and you've said this a couple of times, well, hey, if we had a person that was like a scholarly leader, and there's a time and place for that. I think there are some people that are like, they've got the textbook response. And then there's some people that are more rough cut around the edges, that it's like, listen, I had to learn this by doing it, and you can read whatever you want in a book, but let me tell you the rest of the story. So what would you say? Let's dive into that for just a minute. What are some key differences in leadership and management?
So for me, I think there's two big ones. So, and they start off in the same place. So management is about compliance. And by compliance, I mean, if you're in a management role, you will have a rule book full of policies and processes that you're supposed to be following. And either it's written down as a handbook, or it's just the way we do things around here. But either way, this is how we do stuff. This is how we process invoices here. This is how we handle a customer complaint. This is how we deal with this situation. And there's a process and a policy for how to deal with it. And as a manager, your job is to comply with that process and policy. So your job is to make sure that your team do stuff, do it right, do it on time, right? That's your job as a manager.
Okay.
As a leader, your job is to ensure you make progress somehow. Okay. Because when you go for a leadership job interview, and when you're asked, tell me how you've shown some leadership, give me examples of where you've shown some leadership, the first place is in things where you have made progress. So someone once asked me, when I was talking about this with them, when I was younger and first starting to think about this stuff, they said, well, when you stop being in that leadership role, how will they know that you were there? What is the thing that you did that you say, oh yeah, Ben made sure that we went from here to here.
Sure.
We stopped doing this like this, we started doing like this, and we saved 10% of time, or we improved customer satisfaction by 8%, something. How will they know you were here? And if you go into your next job interview and say, okay, I can see you've been a team leader for the last 2 years. Tell me your biggest achievements in those 2 years. And all you can say is, I made sure we followed all of the processes and we hit all of the deadlines and we did everything right and did it on time. I'm probably not going to give you the leadership job. I might give you a management job where I really need somebody to keep everything in line. But if it's a leadership role, I want you to make something happen. I want you to move things on somehow. So the first difference, management's about compliance, leadership is about making progress.
Okay.
And the second is similar. Management is about following the rule book. Leadership is about dealing with the situations that aren't in the rule book. What do you
Interesting.
do? What do you do when the rule book breaks down, or when a situation arises that nobody's thought to write the rule book for? And that's kind of also, I mean, I've got situations. I had a situation at work once when I was new as a department head.
Hmm.
I was 35 years old. I was 10 or 15 years younger than all the other department heads around the place. I was younger than most of my team, and one of the senior members of staff in my department um, started behaving oddly, and it turned out that he had an early onset dementia,
Mm.
and he couldn't tell that he was unwell. And I promise you, there's no HR handbook that describes how to deal with that situation,
Absolutely.
because all of the things that have a conversation with the person, explore what the options are, talk through, couldn't do that. Just it wasn't medically possible to do that. So basically, I had to figure out what to do. What are you going to do? And all you can lean on is, what do you think is the right thing to do? And do that. And it was really challenging, but that's where I learned that lesson, that leadership is what happens when the rule book breaks down. And yeah, so those are my two differences. Leadership is about making progress and dealing with the situations that aren't in the rule book. Management is about following the rule book and complying with the policies and
Oh, that's
principles.
fantastic. That's great. When you're talking about doing the right thing, I think that that is such a valuable um, comment too. That leaders definitely, that you have to have integrity to have a good moral compass and be headed in whatever you believe is the right direction.
Yeah.
Um, Morally, I remember. I think it's a quote by Michael J. Fox, and he says something along the lines, and I may misquote this or I'll paraphrase it, but he says something along the lines, and here's Mike Ashley says, doing the right thing is always the right thing. That is right, Mike. Doing the right thing is always the right thing. He says that over and over again.
He's got it on a
Um,
shirt, I think. He's got it
yeah.
on a shirt.
And so the Michael J. Fox quote says something along the lines of, it's not about doing the next thing right, but about doing the next right thing.
Mm.
And I think that's so um that sums up a piece of leadership, is because it's like, well, what's the next right thing to do, and if you can steer in that direction, it's very, very powerful. um one of the comments you made too, as we're shifting through that, yeah, I mean, you have such well, I could have this show just go on forever. I'm gonna have to have you on again because we'll be able to break it down multiple times.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about, because especially when it comes to leadership, and you're saying, okay, making progress, and Sean brought that up last week, like, hey, what's the legacy you're leaving? I think that's a very strong point you just said too, Ben, is like, how do people know you were there?
Yeah.
And because there is so much to do, it's easy to get sidetracked, it's easy to get overwhelmed, it's easy to have too much to do at times, right? And so how do you pick, as we're talking about the Michael J. Fox statement, how do you pick the next right thing?
Yeah.
And you shared with me, you said, hey, one of the problems that you see in leadership is leaders feel overwhelmed with too much to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. And and actually, to go back half a step before we go forwards into that.
Sure, sure.
So most so-called leadership roles, you have to do both management and leadership, right? So
Absolutely.
so so and they're often talked about as enemies, right? That and when you see lists of things that managers do, or how a boss behaves and how a leader behaves, and it's always manager bad, leader good, and that's so I mean, even people saying things like, don't be a manager, be a leader. But like, it says assistant manager, right? That's my job, is manager. I have to do that. And the management stuff can just pour onto you. And most I think it's true for most people in leadership roles of some kind or another. We could all work 12, 15, 26 hours a day with the stuff that's coming at us. Um,
Absolutely.
from your boss, from your team, from your customers, from the things that you're thinking about. And most of it is management-y stuff. Can you fill this form in? Can you deal with this?
Management-y? Is that a word?
Yeah, it's all kind of, it's all management stuff.
Yes.
You have to find a way to make a push for the leadership stuff. And I had a big kind of revelatory moment one day when I was still pretty new in this department head job. I was feeling like so much stuff piling on top of me. And I hit a moment in an afternoon when I had no meetings in the diary, I had nothing going on. And I had so clearly 223 unread emails. And I thought, right, I'm going to spend this afternoon smashing through those emails. I'm going to get that down. And so off I went, and I got into the email box, and I started answering things that had been delayed, and I got into little conversations with people. And 5 o'clock came around, and I thought, no, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to get through this. I'm going to keep pushing through, because I know I've got a heck of a day tomorrow. I won't have any time tomorrow to do it. I'm going to keep going. And I looked up at 7 o'clock, and I had 231 unread emails. And I just kind of, I sat back in this big, ugly red executive chair that I had. It was a horrible thing, but it kind of made me feel important sitting in it. So I wheeled it around when I was moving offices and stuff. I sat back in this big red chair and was just like, what am I doing? What? I have to do something different. How do I do anything different to this? Because I felt like I just worked for 4.5 hours and gotten precisely nowhere, and it gone backwards by 8 emails, right? And I talked with someone about this, and it went into a longer conversation about working long hours and how do you deal with that as a new leader, working long hours. And she said to me, so when 5 o'clock hit, you kept going. Why did you keep going? And I said, well, I knew I had to get this stuff done, and I had a full day the next day, so I had to get it done. I had to stay to get it done. She said, yeah, or you could have gone home. And I said, what do you mean? it kind of didn't compute. She says, no. So if let's say you've got a report to write and it's due in a day or two, and you've set aside your time, and you haven't got it finished at 5 o'clock, what do? So will you stay and finish it? She said, no, go home. And I was like, but then I wouldn't get it done because of tomorrow. She said, well, maybe you shift some things tomorrow. I said, yeah, but then I'd end up working late tomorrow. She said, yeah. I said, here's the thing. If you want to stop working long hours, you have to stop working long hours.
That's a strong statement. And it's so simple, though.
And then he said, okay. He said, and if you want to, if you're typically working 11 hours a day and you want to work 8 hours a day, you've got to do less stuff. Like, hang on, how does that work? And the answer is, well, you've got to prioritize. And the follow-up question is, well, how do you do that?
Sure.
And that's the big question. How do you find the things that are going to actually make a difference, that are really important for you to do? How do you do that? And I lean into the 80-20 rule. So you know the 80-20 principle, right? So this started, Vilfredo Pareto was a economist in the 1800s in Italy, and he noticed, he did a study and determined that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the people.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the 1940s, management theorists got hold of this and started talking about the fact that 80% of your problems come from 20% of your processes or systems. And if you can fix those, you're going to get rid of 80% of your problems. I like to think of it that 80% of your impact comes from just 20% of what you do.
Wow.
And that makes it really important that you identify that 20%. Right? What is the 20% of what you do that makes a difference, that makes 80% of your impact? Because my favorite shorthand for this is, if you're feeling busy at work, I want you to remember that you could have 80% of your impact if you completely nail Monday. Completely nail Monday, and you've had 80% of your impact. You're going to feel better for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, right?
Sure.
Or even put it another way, if you completely nail an hour to 90 minutes a day, you're going to have 80% of your impact. And the rest of your day, you'll have the other 20%. And then you can start, then you start feeling better about some of the stuff that slides. Right. And what I would encourage, so we talk about giving toolkit, right? So building the toolkit.
Yes.
A really simple tool. Every day, at the end of the day, ask yourself, what's the most important thing I have to do tomorrow? And when am I going to do it? Like one thing, I'm coming back to narrowing it down to one thing. What's the most important thing I have to do tomorrow? And when am I going to do it? And the reason you ask yourself that at the end of the day is that often the time to do it is right at the beginning of the day.
Right.
And you don't want to spend the beginning of your day thinking, well, what shall I do today? Right? That's a waste of that golden hour at the beginning of the day when you're most up for it. You want to go into the day with a clear plan that this is the most important thing and this is when I'm going to get it done. And if you start doing that every day, you know you're getting your 80% impact in. You know where that's coming. And then the rest of the day you can relax a little bit because you know you've done your most important stuff.
No, that's really, really good too. And I've heard similar, but I think you're spot on with hey, what's my most impactful thing and when do you tackle it? And I think a lot of times, going back to what you said earlier, just your friend or mentor that gave you advice and says, well, if you want to stop working so much, then stop working so much. It's interesting because I was on a men's group show this morning. I was sitting in and just listening and learning, and one of the things that the guy that was running the show said, he says, it's really important to get sleep. And the interesting thing, and here's how I tie this together, is leaders, when they're trying to go up that mountain, when they're trying to prove themselves, it's easy to get lost and just wear yourself out. And so when you're saying like, hey, rather than just trying to make, my 80% impact and my 20% of my time, we're trying to go 100% all the time. And then, okay, I'm going 100% here, 100% here, 100% here. And then I'm doing that up until 5 o'clock. I'm checking my 223 emails. And then I'm at 7 o'clock and I've still got more. And then I have to, and I've experienced it. I have to imagine you experienced it going through the email stuff. You go home, and instead of this really solid sense of accomplishment, you're just worn out.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's exhausting, and it does two more things. I mean, one, it saps your confidence away.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're like, I can't stay on top of my own workload. How am I supposed to be telling people what they should be doing with theirs? Right? I'm in charge. I'm supposed to be helping people figure out. I can't stay on top of my own stuff. So your confidence starts going, and you feeling like you're not getting anything done. Because you're probably not, because usually that the 20% of stuff where you have your most impact isn't management-y stuff, right?
Management-y stuff. I've coined that for you.
I saw that you commented it. So yeah. The management stuff isn't where you're going to have your most impact. It's in some leadership stuff. What's the stuff you're changing? How are you pushing things forward? How are you making sure that your team makes progress? Absolutely. That's where you're going to have your most impact. The management stuff is exhausting because it's just management. It is important. It's really important to get it right, but it's exhausting and draining. And when we're at our busiest, the things that we stop doing are often the things that we absolutely need to do to stay whole and human and feel like us. So some people, that's going to the gym, or playing with your kids, or eating as a family, or
spending time with your wife.
Yeah.
Or spouse.
Spending time with your spouse, playing the guitar for me. The things that go out of the window.
You're gonna play the guitar today? I know it's on the wall.
It is on the wall. Well, it might be embarrassing. It would be embarrassing in the context of the show. I'm very good, by the way. It wouldn't be embarrassing because I'm not good. I'm very good, okay. But it would be embarrassing in the context of the show. Yeah, you stop doing those things. Working long hours. I haven't got time to do the stuff that's me, that keeps me as me. And that's in terms of the urgent important matrix. Another way to look at prioritization.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Sleep, eating right, exercise, playing the guitar for me. They are never urgent, but they are always important. They are always important, and you have to make time for them.
Absolutely. Like you said, it's how you recharge. That's part of what makes you you. And if you lose yourself to the management role, you lose yourself to the leadership role, you lose yourself trying to in the constant pursuit of perfection, you will never achieve that perfection. The most perfect thing you can do for yourself as a leader is take care of yourself in that sense. Like that becomes mindset. I mean, that's a whole, we're coming to the tail end of this show. That'd be a whole nother show we could get into. One other thing that I wanted to bring up, because you just shared this a moment ago. You were talking about, hey, leaders lack confidence. And you had shared this. You said leaders lack confidence and feel they have to be someone else to lead.
Oh yeah.
And that's what we're talking about. And kind of let's close on, let's sort of wrap on that story. Cause you said, hey, and as I'm saying that even right now, and that was before I had remembered that you put that, is like, we're constantly trying to be in this pursuit of perfection. You're constantly trying to be someone else. You're modeling after what you think or what you've been shown a good leader is. So when you're saying, hey, leaders can end up lacking confidence or they feel they have to be someone else, expand on that a little bit, Ben.
Yeah. So when I was studying at university, I worked in pubs, and there was one pub I did most of my work in, and then there was another pub that I picked up some shifts in occasionally. Mm-hmm. And in that other pub, the manager was really on it. The guy who ran the place was completely on it, was great with his team, always knew what was happening with the stock. The place was spotless. It ran like clockwork. He was in charge. It was fantastic. And there was an assistant manager who barely had to do anything because the manager was so on it, right? And so typically the assistant manager was just one of the guys, one of the team, larking about, showed up 5 or 10 minutes late every now and again. Nobody said anything about it. Would take too long on his cigarette break. Helped himself to a half a Coke out of the post mix in the drink when we weren't supposed to be doing that. He just did it, and everybody kind of did it, and nobody really worried about it. Mm-hmm. He was completely one of the guys until the day the manager was off for a day, and he was then in charge. And suddenly he put on this kind of mask. The person who's 5 minutes late, sorry, you're 5 minutes late. What's going on? And the person who helps himself to a little drink out of the machine. What are you doing? You know you're not supposed to do that. I think you were 20 minutes late yesterday. You had 5 of them. Where does this person come from? And we knew that they weren't being themselves at all. It was just this kind of, I have to put on the leadership mask.
Sure.
And the confidence thing. There's a whole pile of stuff about, I know you talked about humility a lot last week with Sean, being humble. Yes. And if you look at lists of leadership traits, you get humble, vulnerable, empathetic. But if you look at the next list, it will say confident and robust and decisive. And so many of these traits sit at opposite ends of a spectrum. So you have to be confident and humble. And you have to be empathetic and robust, and you have to be decisive and consultative, and flexible and consistent, right? So the leadership game is often about where are you sitting across one of those balances in any particular moment. And what new leaders often feel that they have to do particularly on confidence, humility, but on all of those things, is swing all the way over to one side. So they have to be really, really confident, really, really decisive, make lots of decisions really fast. And it just doesn't feel right because it's not them. Or they
Sure.
have to be really, really humble and never quite make a decision because they're consulting and being empathetic and humble all the time. The truth of it is, wherever you normally sit on those balances, that's great. That's you. Be that. And that is what authentic leadership means for me. It's finding where you normally sit on those things and be that.
Absolutely.
Even if your boss was like way over on the confidence and robustness side, or your previous boss was way over on the humble and empathetic side, you find where you are and be that. And only when you figured that out are you allowed to start nudging it in particular situations. Right.
No, I think that's really strong. I think the importance of it is you do have to take who you are and amplify it. And one thing to consider is when you're looking at those sides of the spectrum, because I guess that hasn't occurred. I mean, it has occurred to me, but it hasn't in so many words where like you're saying, hey, these things sit on the opposite side. Like you have confidence and the robustness and decisiveness. Like those are hard, like direct traits, right?
Yeah.
And then the other side is the softer side of leadership, we'll say. And the unique thing is, and I'm just thinking about this as you're sharing, like complete confidence without any humility, especially if you're not living it, confidence quickly becomes arrogance, and
Yeah.
that's what turns people off. Humility without any confidence, that quickly turns you into a marshmallow, and that turns people off. You
Yeah.
know, when you look at those opposite sides of the spectrum, decisiveness without having some collaborativeness to it. If you're overly decisive, then you get viewed as hard nosed. Oh, well, they're all
Yeah.
only going to do it their way. And so I think any of those traits in excess, if that's not authentically who you are, you're absolutely right. That becomes the bad side of leadership, right? That would be a whole nother show too. We're coming up with
Yeah.
shows left and right, Ben. You're gonna have to come back a few times.
Hey, I'd love to. I'd love to. I mean, that you're right. The decisiveness without consultation, yes, you're going to be seen as hard nosed. You're probably also going to make bad decisions. Sorry,
Mhm.
you just are, because you're missing out on the gold mine that is your team of experience and perspective and ideas and knowledge of how your bit of the business works. If you're not asking them questions before you decide, you're missing out, and you're probably going to make bad decisions as well.
That's a very good point. Well, hey, as we're coming to the tail end here, there was something else Mike said, and this was really good. I wanted to make sure and share it because Michael Ashley brought this up. He said, "Your job as a leader," and this is from where we were talking earlier. He said, "Your job as a leader is not to do everything, but to get everything done.
Yeah.
And to do that, you have to delegate." And I thought that was a great comment that he had shared in the side. I wanted to make sure. So,
Yeah.
Ben, as we're coming to the tail end here, couple of things. One, uh, share how people can get in touch with you. I know you have on your not to put words in your mouth, but I know on the Leadership Jetway, you do have some tools and some stuff people can download. So if you want to share that a little bit, and then just any final thoughts as we're wrapping up here.
Sure. So if people want to find out some more about me, there's a YouTube channel that is called Leadership Jetway. The idea being, I want to get you from the confusion of the airport to the place where you're strapped in your seat and you're ready to go on your leadership journey. That's what I'm after with the Leadership Jetway idea. It's the fast track to upgrading your leadership. It's cheesy as heck, but anyway, that's what I'm trying to do. So there's a YouTube channel called Leadership Jetway. If you go to leadershipjetway.com, there's a PDF guide there that you can download. I call it my expert pack, and it's got a kind of daily checklist. It expands on that. What's the most important thing to do tomorrow idea? Simple daily checklist to plan your day in 5 minutes. Simple framework to have a great one-to-one conversation that builds trust and relationships, and a specific process to actually start getting stuff done. So if you go to leadershipjetway.com, you'll find that there, and I would love you to have it. After that, I'll be sending you some emails and we can get in touch after that. So that would be great. If you want to go and find that, lovely.
Absolutely. And with that, thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for your time and your wisdom on the subject and sharing your thoughts on leadership and management and all of the different paths that we've been down. I think you've definitely given the audience some really good tools and some things to think about. So I appreciate you very much. I look forward to having you on the show again soon, another time. And with that, let me go ahead, and I still sometimes got to mess with my controls. So thank you everybody for coming out and joining us today on the Leadership Toolkit. I appreciate you very much. Again, make sure and check out Ben's website, leadershipjetway.com. Do be certain if you have gained something out of this show, and that really is the goal for us to have just a collaborative, organic conversation between me and my guests. Please do me a favor. Make sure you give a thumbs up, like the show, share the show, subscribe to the channel. I do this every Wednesday starting at 12:05 Mountain Time, 2:05 Eastern. I appreciate you very much. I know your time is valuable, and hopefully you've gained some real value out of this episode of the Leadership Toolkit. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. We'll talk to you soon, everybody.